It was a cold December night, and we found ourselves in a small, spooky town in Canada. My name's Jerry, and my friends Ryan and Sarah decided to go on a road trip. I love horror stories and visiting haunted places. Ryan's a photographer, and Sarah's a YouTuber. We've already explored a few haunted spots together. A few days earlier, Sarah read about a road in Canada that was said to be haunted with creepy stories of strange accidents and spooky happenings. When she told us about it, Ryan and I got pretty excited. We thought it would be awesome to drive down that road at night and see for ourselves if it was really as haunted as people said. The next day, I got everything ready for the trip, making sure we had all the essentials. Sarah double-checked her video camera and microphone so she could record the whole adventure for her vlog. Around 11 p.m., the three of us piled into the car and hit the road. It was pitch dark outside, and the road cut through a thick forest. The silence was so heavy it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and the shadows of the trees seemed to stretch longer and creepier the farther we went. I was driving, and the inside of the car was eerily quiet. I finally broke the silence and asked. They both nodded. Ryan pulled out his camera to snap some shots, while Sarah agreed that it felt strange and unsettling. Not long after, we noticed a weird light up ahead. I slowed the car down, trying to figure out what it was. There were no signs of a town or gas station anywhere nearby. As we got closer, we saw an old car parked by the side of the road with its headlights on. Ryan suggested we check it out, so we got closer. Just as we were about to stop, the car's headlights suddenly flickered off. We all froze, staring at the car in confusion. "This is really strange," I whispered. Ryan, looking uneasy, replied, "I don't know, but this is definitely weird." Sarah tried to peek into the car with her camera, but there was no one inside. Her face went pale with fear when, suddenly, as Sarah leaned back slightly, we all noticed something that made our blood run cold, a shadowy figure sitting in the car. We jumped back, hearts racing, completely terrified. Without saying a word, I quickly motioned for my friends to run back to the car. That moment felt like something out of a nightmare, and fear washed over us all. I started the engine and slammed my foot on the gas, telling my friends we need to get out of here. I don't feel right about this place. The atmosphere felt even more unsettling, and Ryan agreed, adding that it was terrifying but somehow fascinating. Despite our fear, both Ryan and Sarah wanted to keep going. Sarah argued that if she got good footage, it could bring millions of new viewers to her channel. Reluctantly, I gave in to their persistence, even though my gut told me to turn around. We continued down the lonely highway, surrounded by thick trees and complete silence. The only sound was the hum of the car, but it felt like the shadows around us were closing in, like something or someone could jump out at us at any moment. The deeper we drove, the more our fear grew. Then, out of nowhere, we saw a dark shape by the side of the road, a figure that looked like a person. But as we got closer, it vanished. I panicked and blurted out, "What was that?" "Did you see that?" Both Sarah and Ryan nodded, clearly shaken. By now, we were sure this place was haunted, and whatever was here was making itself known. Still, curiosity got the best of us, and we pressed on, even though we knew something wasn't right. Then, we heard it, a faint whispering coming from inside the car. At first, I thought it was just Sarah or Ryan talking. But when I looked over, they were both staring at me, just as confused and scared as I was. There was no one else in the car with us, yet the whispering continued. That was the moment it hit us. The haunting wasn't just outside anymore. It was in the car with us, and it felt like whatever was there wanted us to know it was watching. We were all so terrified we couldn't even speak to each other. The tension was suffocating. Finally, I mustered up the courage to say, "We need to leave now." But Sarah refused, saying we had come too far and might miss out on something amazing. Just as she spoke, the car suddenly jerked to a stop, as if it had hit something. We froze, holding our breath, but the road ahead was clear, no animals or debris in sight. After a tense pause, I stepped out to check. I crouched down and saw an old blood-stained cloth with faint finger marks on it. My heart pounded. I called Ryan and Sarah over, and they both stared, shocked. Sarah whispered, "This is so strange." Ryan asked, "Do you think there was an accident here?" I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, so I dropped the cloth and said, "We need to leave now. This place is dangerous." As we climbed back into the car, a strange light appeared behind us, like another car was following us. Ryan asked, "Where did that car come from?" "We haven't seen any other cars out here." Sarah turned around and, through the rearview mirror, caught a glimpse of something that made her face go pale. As I pressed the gas pedal, the car speeding down the empty road, Sarah suddenly screamed, "Jerry, drive faster!" "Something's following us." My heart pounded in my chest as I floored the accelerator. Inside the car, everything was quiet except for our heavy breathing, and it felt like the world around us was turning into something darker, more dangerous. The trees on either side of the road seemed to loom over us, their long shadows stretching out like hands reaching for the car. Faint whispers filled the air, and it felt like we were surrounded by something we couldn't see. After a while, I slowed the car, trying to calm down. "The road ahead looks deserted, no lights, no cars," I said, my voice shaky. Sarah whispered, sounding relieved. Maybe whatever was following us has left. But just as we started to feel a tiny bit better, something terrifying happened. A handprint suddenly appeared on the car window, as if someone had pressed their hand against it from the outside. It froze us in place. We all stared at it, our blood running cold. We didn't know what to do. Should we keep running, or stay and find out what this creepy place had in store for us? I turned to Ryan, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you feel like something's trying to get us to leave?" He nodded nervously, his voice low. "Yes, it's like whatever's here wants us to go." Even though the fear was building up, we decided to keep going. A little further down the road, we came across an old, abandoned building sitting by the side of the road. Its windows were broken, and the walls looked like they were about to fall apart. Ryan looked at us and asked, "What do you think? Should we check it out?" At first, we hesitated, but eventually, Sarah and I agreed. We stepped out of the car and cautiously approached the building. The door had deep, claw-like scratches on it, like something or someone had attacked it with brutal force. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, almost as if it was hard to breathe. Ryan turned on his camera's flash, and the light revealed strange, creepy writings on the walls. Some were written in red, almost like blood, and the sight made our skin crawl. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. We jumped, the sound echoing through the building. I rushed to the door to open it, but when I reached the glass panel, I saw something in the reflection, a shadowy figure standing behind me. My heart nearly stopped. I spun around quickly, but there was nothing there. Sarah and Ryan rushed to the door, looking at me with wide eyes. I whispered, my voice trembling, "I saw something, someone, watching us through the glass." Sarah's face went pale, and fear swept over her. "Jerry, we need to get out of here right now," she said, her voice firm. This place is not for us. As soon as we tried to leave the house, something invisible seemed to slam the door shut. It was completely stuck. I pushed with all my strength, but it wouldn't move. My hands were shaking with fear as Sarah grabbed her phone to try calling someone. But there was no signal. She looked at us and said, "There's no signal. Check your phones." Ryan and I checked ours, and sure enough, we had no service either. Before we could even process how freaked out we were, we heard footsteps coming from behind us. We turned around, and what we saw made us freeze in terror. A figure was floating toward us. Its face was a blurry mess, and its eyes were dark, hollow pits. It looked like it wasn't even touching the ground. We screamed in pure fear, all of us. The shadow moved slowly toward us, and as it did, it felt like our feet were stuck, like something was holding us in place. My heart was pounding, and I shut my eyes tight, praying as fast as I could. Just as I finished, the door suddenly slammed open with a loud bang. We all stumbled out and fell onto the ground. We scrambled to our feet and ran to the car, jumping in and quickly locking the doors behind us. We sat there, catching our breath, still shaking from what just happened. I started the car and sped off toward the highway, desperate to get as far away as possible. But no matter how far we drove, the road seemed endless. We kept ending up in the same spot, like we were stuck in a loop. The fear inside me grew. I couldn't focus on driving anymore. I couldn't hold it in anymore. How is it possible that we keep ending up here? I blurted out. My eyes stayed on the road, but it felt like we weren't moving at all. The headlights cut through the dark, but everything felt off, like we were standing still. The road ahead seemed more and more ominous, and it felt like something was watching us, like we were trapped. Sarah, shaking, whispered, "Are we stuck here forever?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "We need to figure out how to break this loop," I said. But it felt like we were completely trapped. I tried changing direction, but no matter where I went, the same road came back. I was exhausted, and nothing was working. Finally, I stopped the car and got out to see if I could figure something out. That's when I realized, if we kept driving without a plan, we'd run out of gas, and that would be the end of any hope we had of escaping. Ryan and Sarah got out too, and the three of us stood by the road, staring into the dark. The highway was eerily quiet, and the air felt thick and heavy, like it was pressing down on us. All we could hear was the sound of our own heartbeats in the silence. Sarah looked at me and asked, "What do we do now? What if we can't get out of here?" For a few minutes, there was complete silence. Then, from the other side of the road, we heard a faint sound, like someone was quietly walking toward us. Sarah and Ryan both looked at me in panic, and we quickly scanned the area. Slowly, a figure appeared on the road. It looked lifeless, and just its presence made the air feel heavier with fear. As the figure came into focus, it was like something invisible had grabbed us all at once. Sarah gasped. "That's the same person we saw before. He keeps appearing." We gathered our courage and started to approach it, but as soon as we got close, the figure disappeared. We stepped back, looking at each other in horror, when suddenly, a series of terrifying noises started. It was like a storm was rushing through the trees. The older branches creaked and snapped, making strange, eerie sounds. It felt like we were surrounded by dozens of people running toward us from all directions. In sheer panic, we jumped back into the car, locked the doors, and started reciting verses from the Quran. We kept praying for about 10 to 15 minutes, and gradually, the sounds faded away. I started the car, and with God's name on my lips, I pulled back onto the highway. But just as we kept praying, something even worse happened. Sarah suddenly shouted, but her voice had completely changed. It was deep and masculine. "Stop the car," she yelled. We turned around in shock and froze. Sarah's eyes were blood red. Ryan, terrified, looked at me and asked, "What happened to Sarah?" Before I could answer, she screamed again, her voice full of anger. "Can't you understand? Stop the car." I told Ryan to keep praying out loud. Just then, Sarah let out another deafening scream, and the car swerved out of control, crashing into a tree and finally stopping. We were too stunned to even react at first. But then, before we could make sense of what was going on, Sarah opened the car door and ran straight into the forest. Even during the day, it's easy to get lost in that forest, but now it was pitch black and we couldn't see anything. Without thinking, we got out of the car and ran after her. You wouldn't believe how fast Sarah was running in the dark. Within minutes, she vanished from our sight. We were gasping for air, our legs aching. Ryan, shaking, asked, "What's happening to Sarah?" I told Ryan that whatever this thing was, it had taken over Sarah, and I needed to find her fast. We turned on our phone flashlights and started calling her name as we moved deeper into the forest. But it felt like someone was always near us, sometimes footsteps behind us, sometimes ahead. We kept looking around, but there was no one there. Suddenly, I heard Sarah's voice from one side. "Jerry, please help me." "I'm here. Get me out of here." I yelled back, "Sarah, where are you? Tell me, please." We started moving toward the sound of her voice. As we got closer, we heard Sarah crying. But the closer we got, the farther away the sound seemed. We kept shouting, "Sarah, where are you? Answer us." Then the voice stopped and everything went quiet. After a moment, Sarah's voice came again, but now it was desperate. "Ryan, please save me. I'm here. Hurry." She sounded like she was in so much pain. We rushed toward the voice, but it seemed to be coming from deeper in the forest. The voice kept calling out, "Jerry, Ryan, please come quickly." We had no idea how far into the forest we'd gone. Eventually, her voice changed from crying to soft sobs, and then it became laughter, Sarah's voice. But she wasn't there. We stood still, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, when we heard it again. "What happened? Who are you looking for?" The voice came from above us, from the trees. We shined the light into the branches, and what we saw made our stomachs turn. There, sitting in the tree, was Sarah, holding a dead animal and eating it raw. Her face and hands were covered in blood and flesh. We almost threw up from the horror of it. Then, with a malicious laugh, she said, "You were looking for me, weren't you?" I shouted, furious, "Who are you? What do you want from us? What have we done to you?" She replied coldly, "I want her, and I'll take her with me. You've taken my place and disturbed me." Those words filled us with terror. I begged her, "Please let her go. It was a mistake. We won't come back here. Just let us go." Then she jumped down from the tree. We stumbled back, and she laughed again, her voice full of malice. "Do you want to take her with you?" She turned her face to the tree and started banging her head against it. That was the moment we had been waiting for. I signaled to Ryan to grab her from behind. Without hesitation, we rushed forward, grabbed her, and brought her to the ground. I pulled out my phone and started playing prayers, holding it close to her ear as we tightly gripped her hands and feet. She writhed in pain, screaming in a deep voice, "Let me go. You're not doing the right thing. You'll regret this." But we ignored her threats. We had to get Sarah out of this. After a short time, Sarah lost consciousness. We lifted her up and kept playing the prayers, amazed at the strength of God's words. It felt like the Quran was giving us the power to hold on. Even though we were lost and had no idea where to go, we kept running. We were exhausted, and if we stayed any longer in that forest, we knew things could get even worse. The situation was getting more dangerous by the second, so we rushed as fast as we could. Eventually, we reached the highway, but we were focused on one thing: getting to the car. We barely made it there, and our fear was at an all-time high. We didn't dare look back, not even once. We jumped into the car, laid Sarah in the back seat, and tied her hands with a cloth. Ryan stayed with her in the back, and I started the engine. When we finally checked the time, it was almost 4 a.m. We had spent the entire night wandering through the forest and highway. By 7 a.m., we finally pulled up to Sarah's house. Her family was horrified when they saw our state. We told them everything that had happened. And after that, Sarah went through months of spiritual healing because the entity that had taken control of her was extremely powerful. It took almost a year for her to fully recover. Even now, she wears an amulet to protect herself from any more harm. After that incident, we stopped engaging in any of those activities for good. So, that was my story. If you liked it, please share it. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Now, let's move on to the second story, which was shared by Kyle. Let's hear it in his own words. Before we start, I have a quick request. If you're new to my channel and haven't subscribed yet, please do. A lot of people listen to my stories, but haven't subscribed yet. Your support means a lot and really helps me keep going. I hope you'll support me. And now, let's dive into Kyle's story. This story happened in 2022 at Wonder Lake in Denali, specifically at the well-known Ping Point. It's all true, and it happened to me and some of my friends. We decided to go on a trip to Wonder Lake, bringing along food like chicken to cook while we were there. We arrived in the evening, and there was a lot to see. The area was beautiful, surrounded by mountains and streams running through them. We spent a lot of time exploring, enjoying nature, and having fun. After a while, we all gathered at a spot we picked to cook. By the time we finished eating, it was about 10 p.m. At this point, all the other people who had been there earlier had already left, and we were the only ones left in the area. The atmosphere felt completely different now. What was once lively and full of laughter now felt eerie, like the night had taken over too soon. It was pitch dark, and the silence was almost unnerving. Earlier, we hadn't noticed how late it was because we were so caught up in the fun. But now, with the others gone and the place feeling so quiet and still, we started to feel uneasy. It was like the air had changed, and we all began to think it was time to go. Even the simple task of packing our stuff into the car felt heavy, like we couldn't get out of there fast enough. I should mention that someone had warned us earlier not to stay too late, because the place was so remote, and who knew what kinds of creatures could be lurking there. We hadn't seen anything strange, but it felt like something or someone was out there, watching us from the shadows, without ever revealing itself. Eventually, we managed to get everything packed and jumped into the car, eager to leave. As we drove away, some friends in the back seat told me that when they looked back, all they could see was pure darkness. It looked so creepy, like the place itself was holding its breath. We kept feeling like something was following us, but we couldn't see it. One of my friends said that if whatever was following us actually showed itself, we wouldn't be as scared. But whatever it was, it made its presence known in a way that was hard to ignore. It was like we could feel it, but it never fully revealed itself. By the time we were driving away, we were all really scared. My gut told me something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with the car's windshield, like it wasn't just the darkness that was messing with my mind. It was 4 a.m. when we suddenly heard a loud explosion. I didn't know what hit us because the car was speeding and everything happened so fast. We were already terrified, and the blast made my friends even more scared. They all started shouting, "Oh my God." One friend was so shaken up that he started crying. Blood splattered across my windshield, and I couldn't see anything. My heart was racing. I quickly pulled the handbrake, and the car skidded before finally stopping a short distance away. Thank God we didn't flip over, and we managed to avoid a serious accident. The car didn't roll because it was heavy, but we were all completely shaken. We quickly got out of the car, anxious to figure out what had caused the blood on the windshield. With a flashlight, we checked the road where we had hit something. In the distance, we saw something lying in the road, but we couldn't tell what it was. Slowly, we approached, and to our horror, we saw it was a huge piece of fresh meat, still oozing blood. Our hearts were racing, and we couldn't understand how or why this piece of meat was out there in the middle of nowhere. Then one of my friends, his voice trembling, said, "I've heard that ghosts like meat. There's no one around here, so it must be a ghost or some kind of supernatural creature messing with us. We've been feeling something strange following us for a while." That made our fear grow even more. Without saying another word, we rushed back to the car, wiped the blood off the windshield, and jumped in. We tried to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. I turned the key over and over, but it was dead. The silence around us felt suffocating, and it seemed like something was watching us, feeding off our fear. I should mention, we were in a mountainous area with no cell phone signal, so we couldn't call for help. We had to figure something out. Two of my friends decided to walk to an area where there might be a signal. They wrapped cloths around themselves for protection and started walking. We just hoped they would be able to get help before whatever was following us could catch up. We kept walking ahead while the rest of us stayed by the car. Everyone was feeling scared, but we had no choice but to wait. The two friends walking ahead kept reciting the Quran, and as they went, they suddenly got a signal on their phones. They quickly called a mechanic, and after what felt like a long wait, the mechanic finally arrived. He checked the car, but said there was nothing wrong with it. So why hadn't it started? The mechanic worked on the car for a long time. By the time it was 12:30 a.m., we had been waiting for a while, but finally, the car started. We all let out a sigh of relief, and the mechanic left. Everything seemed fine while he was fixing the car, and nothing unusual happened. I drove the car forward, but after a while, some friends said they needed to stop and freshen up. They didn't want to stop in an isolated spot anymore. They wanted somewhere with more activity. But as we kept driving, we couldn't find a place like that. Eventually, their patience ran out. They told me, "Brother, stop now. We can't take it anymore. God is our caretaker. Let's stop together so we don't feel scared." I stopped the car, and while my friend and I stayed inside, the others went to the side of the road to freshen up. They walked a little further down where there were bushes, and then they suddenly heard a girl crying. They focused on the sound, and it stopped. But when they ignored it, thinking it might be their imagination, the crying started again. They shone their torch in the direction the sound was coming from, and that's when they saw something strange. The ground seemed to give way, and sitting there, crying, was a girl in a white dress, facing away from them. As the light hit her back, she suddenly turned to look at them. Her long, dark hair and terrifying face made their blood run cold. They screamed and ran back to the car, shouting, "Start the car quickly! Let's go!" I saw their panic, so I didn't waste any time. I started the car and drove off fast. As we left, we heard a girl screaming behind us, and that's when I understood why they were so terrified. After a while, we started feeling a bit calmer, and some of my friends fell asleep in the car. I decided to take out my phone to record some videos of the journey. I opened the camera and started filming the outside, when suddenly I saw a girl on the side of the road. But no one else saw her, just me. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked around at my friends, who were still sleeping. I immediately turned off the camera, but when I checked the video later, I saw that the girl had been recorded. I showed the video to my family, but to my shock, it had completely disappeared from my phone. After that night, we never went back to that place again. And so, as the darkness closes in, the terror lingers. But the story isn't over yet. If you want to hear more chilling tales that will keep you up at night, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. Join us next time, if you dare, to unravel more of the unknown. Stay safe, or you might not make it to the next one.